السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله. We begin in the name of Allah Azza wa Jal by asking Him to send peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May His peace and blessings be upon him and his family. MashaAllah, it's good to see everybody. I'm very excited to be back here with you all. I know we had a little bit of a break after our introduction class because of the ICNA conference, and now we're back, inshallah ta'ala, to learn and to experience this journey of Islamic history together. First things first, logistics. One of the ways we're going to make sure everybody's informed about class timings and all of that is this QR code. So please take a picture of that with your phone, and you will automatically be added into the WhatsApp group. And then we'll use that to communicate with the students who are coming here regularly. So I'll shine this again at the end of class, but please take a moment right now. I know everybody's got their phones, so take that, and then we will keep everybody posted, inshallah ta'ala, on happenings and all of that. Usually I will do my best to try and be here at Dhuhr time to pray Dhuhr with you. Unfortunately, I was delayed today, so I apologize for arriving slightly late today. Everybody got it? Okay, it says request sent. So Brother Nabil, are you getting it? Okay, so he'll take care of it, inshallah. Perfect. Okay, Bismillah. If you guys recall from the previous class, we talked about where Islamic history took place. And you guys remember the map that I showed? Everybody recall this? If we go back, right, this was we talked about where Islamic history unfolded. And this was by and large for 1,000+ years, the known human world. Right? The West, quote unquote, had not been discovered as of yet. We'll even talk about how Muslims were instrumental in that happening. But much of what was the known world at that time is how far Islam actually reached. Now, of course, there were pockets, even you can see on this map, right? There were pockets like South Africa, for instance, that Islam did not come to until Sheikh Makassar, which is probably in the 1700s or so. But for by and large, the first 1,000 years or more, what you're looking at is the heartland of the Muslim empire. We sometimes get fixated on just that Abbasid area, if you will, the Umayyad and the Abbasid, that part right around where Saudi Arabia is now. But what we fail to see is that in Islamic history, there were revival movements that were happening as far as India. When we cover the section on Islam in China, we'll talk about China and Southeast Asia and how Islam spread there. We will talk, of course, about North Africa and even East Africa, getting down to Mogadishu, which for those that don't know, is the Latinized version of the word Maqad al-Shah. That's where Mogadishu comes from. Maqad al-Shah, because the people that were encountered there seemed like they were very Persian. And so the Arabs said, oh, this must be the seat of the Persians, right? So Maqad al-Shah, that's what it translates to. And then even as far west as Spain, which we will spend some time actually going over when we get to that section and that unit. Right? There's a lot to unpack just in Islamic Spain alone. So we, however, oftentimes don't realize how far, for instance, the Ottomans made it into Europe, right? All the way into the Europe. Many parts of Hungary and Bulgaria today, actually, even if you go to this day, you will see the minarets of the Ottoman Empire's domes and minarets from their masjids that they had there, right? Cyprus as well. So much of the Mediterranean area was actually ruled by what was formerly the Byzantines and what would become the Muslim Empire. So all of this very, very, kind of essential area for us. But Islamic history took place in much of the known much of the known world, not just Muslim world, the known world at that time. Any questions about this? Yes, brother. No, it doesn't. This is a Wikipedia map that just had, so I think what they tried to do is color code the different types of empires. Not all of them are Muslim, right? So these are just, at one time, these are the different ruling powers. One of the things that we'll see, guys, is that even though you had a Khalifa for the Muslim world, oftentimes power was within the regional rulers and generals. So you may have a caliph, but the caliph himself may not actually be all that powerful. This isn't the case in the early days, but it does become the case later on. So what you have is a lot of regional areas of the world that have their own dynasty. For instance, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, who's very famous, of course, for the opening of Jerusalem for the Muslims, or the reopening, I should say, of Jerusalem for the Muslims. Many people don't know that for 100 years, his own family kind of ruled in that area. There's a whole Ayyubid dynasty that ruled in that area, right? So it's just, again, it's an important kind of point to just note. Okay. So what I wanted to discuss today was just some of the historians that are well known in our tradition. These are just names for people to kind of understand who they are. These are not accurate pictures, by the way. Every year somebody asks me this, like, is this what they look like? These are approximations. We didn't have pictures and cameras until the later ones. But let's go with the first one. Ibn Kathir. How many people have heard that name before? Right? Many people. Most famous perhaps for his tafsir, right, of the Quran. So he was a scholar. He was a mufassir, but he was also a historian and a scholar. He was an expert in tafsir, in tarikh, which is history, and fiqh. And he's one of the leading authorities in Sunni Islam, right? We can go kind of into just briefly his life. He was born in Bosra under the Mamluk Sultanate, which we'll get to inshallah when we cover that. And his teachers included people like Al-Dhahabi and Imam Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. He wrote lots of books, including a 14-volume universal history called Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, the beginning and the end. And he actually wrote out in this book the entire kind of history of the world, if you will, from an Islamic perspective. Of course, there's Tafsir Ibn Kathir, which is very, very well known and has been translated in much of the world. And I think I have it. It's at home. It's 10 volumes in English alone, and that's after a lot of the hadith that were weak have been removed from it. And he was very well known for that time, although he did differ. Some of his opinions from Muslim Mufassirin from a tafsir perspective did differ with others like Tabari and who have you. But his book Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya is considered kind of a very well-known, historian's take, if you will. We also have before him, a man by the name, the second one on there is At-Tabari. He was a Persian, again, a Sunni Muslim scholar who was known as a polymath. What's a polymath, guys? Somebody. That's right. When I first heard the word polymath, I was like, oh, he knew a lot of math. A lot of different types of math. Polymath is actually somebody who knows a lot of different subjects. And not just subjects, they're SMEs. They are subject matter experts in multiple subjects. What I was very amazed about when I first started studying this, guys, is that the Muslims didn't just confine themselves to like one discipline and say, okay, you know what, I'm going to become an astronomer. They saw knowledge in everything they looked at. So knowledge was coming from all different sources in the world, and that's what they focused on. In fact, one of my teachers explained something very beautiful. He said, when you look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, read in the name of your Lord who created. That one of the interpretations of that verse is that we should be reading Allah into creation. In other words, we look at creation understanding that this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's majesty. Allah has created these things. Whether we look to the stars or we look into our own selves, we read Allah into that. So it's not just that we're reading, right? We're actually using it as a means of coming closer to and knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the scholars, they did this. He is very well known for being part of what we'll come to later on, the Islamic Golden Age. This Golden Age period in the 800s and 900s of the Common Era. He also wrote a Quranic tafsir, a tafsir al-Tabari, very well known, and he authored several works in world history, poetry, grammar, math, medicine. If it was knowledge, he wanted to write about it. Tarikh al-Rasul wal-Muluk is probably one of his more famous ones, the history of prophets and kings. So he wrote that book. Al-Dhahabi, another very well-known scholar, born in Damascus, son of a goldsmith, and in his book, Tarikh al-Islam al-Kabir, the great history of Islam, right, it's 50 volumes. So these are people that did a lot of research. And by the way, guys, this is well before the printing press, right? Well before like publication of books the way that we see it today, right? In fact, the printing press was it was introduced, but it wasn't officially adopted by the Ottomans until 1727, right, of the Common Era. And so they did a lot of research to go out and find sources and then bring it back to them. And Ibn Hajar, for instance, received it from Abu Huraira ibn al-Dhahabi. It comprised of this book, The Great History of Islam. There are over 30,000 biographical records written in this book. 30,000 individuals to pass down, and then he actually comprised all of that together. Much of what we know in history, I think I mentioned this in the last class, much of what we know in history comes from the personal writings and biographies of people before us, right? So people didn't come down and say, okay, I'm going to write a history book. Some people did, right, later on, especially the history of the Mongols and others. But most of the cases, people were writing about their own lives or the lives of people that they had lived with, and that became part of history. So Usama ibn Munqidh, for instance, who lived during the Crusades, he just wrote about his life. That turned out to be a very important book about what happened during the Crusades, right? So just to understand that. Also, some others that you will come across in our tradition, Ibn Hazm in Andalusia. He was also a polymath, historian. He was born in the Cordoban Caliphate. During that time, yes, there was a caliphate in Cordoba. When I first read that, I was like, that has to be a mistake, because I don't remember a caliphate growing up that was in Cordoba, but it was. In fact, at one point in the Muslim world, you had a caliph in Cordoba, you had a khalifa in Cairo, and you had a khalifa in Baghdad, all at the same time, right? So again, whoever had the most kind of power, if you would, or will in the Muslim world, they declare themselves caliph at that time. But here, Ibn Hazm, he was a legal scholar, actually had his own school of law, the Zahiri school of law, which doesn't really exist today. There's very few Zahiris, if any, that you'll meet. He actually created that, he didn't create it, but he was a huge proponent of the Zahiri school of law. And all of his written works amounted to some 80,000 pages, according to scholars after him. 80,000 pages of writing. Right? Really amazing stuff. Ibn Khaldun, we actually mentioned last class, so I'm not going to go into details there. But I did want to mention a few modern day scholars, because this is not something that's just left for traditional history. Dr. Suleiman Yang, rahmatullahi alayh, who passed away in 2018, was a very prominent Muslim historian and scholar. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him. He taught at Howard University in Washington, D.C. He was a principal investigator of a project called MAPS, and he was formerly the ambassador and head of the chancery at the Gambia Embassy in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. He has a book, he's written many books, including Islam, Christianity, and the African Identity. He actually wrote a book of a history of Islam, of Muslims in America. So he actually documented stories of Muslims in America, both in some of it from the antebellum period, but most of it from the immigration period, and what happened and what their stories were. We actually had the honor of hosting him at Adams Center many years ago. I think it was around 2010 or 2012. And he just did an entire course for us at Adams Center on the history of Islam in Africa and the Americas, and it was wonderful. And I remember his one request for that was, can you get me a projector that will zoom maps? He just wanted to put Google Maps on a screen and just wanted to zoom in and out of it, because he wanted to show us as students all of the different stuff that was happening. It was really, really fantastic course that we were able to get with him. One of his advices to us as a community, actually, and I'll share this with everybody here, is write down your stories. Write down the stories of your own stories, but especially of the people who are getting older. Speak with them, capture them, record them if you can. He's like, these are going to become really important for future generations of Muslims. They will look back on the time of the 1900s, where Muslims were recording and capturing their histories. And that's what historians will need. So I always loved that about him. He was thinking about future historians, even beyond himself at that time. And then there's also Dr. Khalid Blankenship, one of the most brilliant minds in our American Muslim Ummah today. He actually was born in Seattle, Washington. He is an American historian. He specializes in Islamic and Middle Eastern studies. He's at Temple University. I have to check that. I believe he's still at Temple University. And he's one of those minds. I remember being many years ago, I was at a conference, and Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, who's very well known in the community as a speaker and orator, was talking, and Dr. Khalid Blankenship was on stage. And Sheikh Hamza said something, and Dr. Khalid over there on the stage said, nope, that's wrong. It's so-and-so. And he corrected him on stage. And Sheikh Hamza actually, I remember, said, if Dr. Khalid is correcting me, I stand corrected. He's like, I'm not going to mess with this man's knowledge, right? His knowledge in this area is very well known. So anyways, these are some of our modern day kind of historians. And of course, we have even other teachers that are sprouting up all of the time, right? I didn't even mention Dr. Jonathan A.C. Brown, who also teaches at Georgetown University. Not a historian per se, but very well versed in Islamic history as well. So I just wanted to introduce some of these names, just so people have a sense of where our tradition and our history comes from. Any questions about this? All right, let me do this then. I will shift over to... Yes, let's do this here. Wrong one. Sorry guys, you get to see me fumbling through my... Yes, there we go. Just ignore all the thousands of tabs that I have open. Okay. All right. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we are going to begin with the history of the Khulafa Rashidin. This is really kind of the first foray into kind of what we will be discussing today as really where Islamic history begins. By the way, I did bring a couple of books just for everyone because I think I mentioned them. I couldn't remember if I brought them last time. This is Karen Armstrong, Islam: A Short History. It's a very good book. She also is a historian. She's relatively unbiased, I would say. There are certain things that she makes, that she emphasizes in our history that I'm not sure was actually the way it was, but Allahu Alam, it's a very good book. For those that don't have it, I highly recommend it. And then this is the canonical kind of version of Islamic history. This is Shah Najib Abadi, The History of Islam. It's actually a 3-volume book that has now been translated into English. So I do recommend it for those that want this. This you can pick up at. I actually don't know if it's on Amazon anymore, but ICNA conferences and stuff used to have the history of Islam. This is really kind of the version of the Sunni Muslim version of history, if you will. He's very well known for having captured that, and he lived, I believe, in the 1900s, if I'm not mistaken. So it's relatively recent. Okay. Yes, brother. Good question. So the question is, should we separate Islam from the culture? When we talk about the civilization of Islam, I think you have to understand that Islam was part of that culture, and that there are things that informed and guided the culture in a lot of ways. Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah has a very good book on, or actually it's an article he wrote many years ago, where he talked about Islam is like pure water. When you see pure water running in a stream, it takes the color of whatever's underneath it. So if there's mud underneath the pure water, it will look muddy. If it's clear, it'll look clear. If there's some set of sediment that's red, it will look red. He's like, this is Islam. That when it comes into a culture, oftentimes it it becomes a part of it in that people don't even recognize it. Oh, this is just what we did growing up. This is how we washed ourselves, for instance, not realizing that's actually wudu. My son and I, when we went to Spain, it was very interesting because the way that they washed themselves, even before meals, was basically a wudu. And we asked them, like, where we learned this hundreds of years ago, the non-Muslims. We learned this, this is passed down to us from our tradition. It's become part of our culture. So I think that there is a certain sense to which Islam informs much of that culture civilizationally. And there are times where there's a lot of, there's resistance to that. There are norms that other societies may have and say, hey, this is our norms. And there are Muslims, Ibn Battuta talks about this in his travels. He says, I went to areas where just the intermixing that I saw between men and women is not something that would be jaiz in Islam, but they were intermixing like that, right? So there is a sense to which there is sometimes a resistance there. But I think when you talk about a civilization, you have to include culture as part of that, and religion, of course. Good question. Yeah. Let me, so we're talking about, inshallah ta'ala, Khalifa. Right? And one of the things that we recognize is that the word Khalifa itself was not the Caliph, was not something that was created just at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically mentions it actually in Surah Al-An'am. وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَكُمْ خَلَائِفَ الْأَرْضِ وَرَفَعَ بَعْضُكُمْ فَوْقَ بَعْضٍ دَرَجَاتٌ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ فِيمَا آتَاكُمْ إِنَّ رَبَّكَ سَرِيعُ الْعِقَابِ وَإِنَّهُ لَغَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. It is He who has made you successors, khalaif, in the land and raised some of you above others by grades, that He might try you by what He has given you. Surely your Lord is quick to requite evil, and He is most surely the forgiving and the merciful. By and large, the word Khalifa means a successor. Right? It's a successor, it's a representative, a trustee, a deputy. At the time of the death of the Prophet ﷺ, nearly all of the Arabian tribes had joined kind of this Muslim alliance. Right? They had joined it all around Arabia. And so in a lot of ways, you don't have this in Arabian history prior to this point. So the person who's going to take on this job, if you will, it's kind of a unique position to be in, where you're the ruler of a unified Arabia. But it's much more complex than just a small community of Medina. Right? There is a linguistic understanding of the word Khalifa. That's what we talked about, right? Being a successor. And then there's the idea that, hey, we actually have not just a successor to the Prophet, but a ruler that is one for the entire kind of Muslim ummah. That's more what it means linguistically, or colloquially. This is how we understand what a Khalifa is. And in a lot of ways, throughout Islamic history, there's been kind of this battle cry to bring back the Khilafah or make sure that there's a Khalifa. What was very interesting was at the death of the Prophet ﷺ, we have to recognize that many people were shocked about what had just happened. The Prophet ﷺ had spent 23 years receiving revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. And even people like Umar ibn Khattab, he would even walk in the streets saying, anybody that says Muhammad is dead, let him know that I will chop off his head. I will be very, very stern with him. Right? And it was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the companion of the Prophet ﷺ, the best friend of the Prophet ﷺ, that had to remind people, that had to remind them that, look, the Prophet has gone. He's dead. And there are other prophets that have passed away before him. Will you then turn back on your heels after he has given you guidance, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran? And Umar ibn Khattab said, it was as if I heard that verse for the first time. When Abu Bakr brought us down, he's like, that's when we started to grieve. We realized the Prophet is gone. Now, from our perspective, there's a leadership void that needs to be filled. How do you go from having somebody who has direct communication with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the angel Jibreel into now what do you do with these, these communities of Arabs that have pledged allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, that have come into Islam? How do you uphold that? And you need to uphold the alliances, You need to support the economic needs of people, need to manage political conflict, and even in spite of all that, the Ummah didn't just need a king, but it needed a righteous leader, like an imam that had wisdom, grace, and the ability to pull everybody together. That's what the Ummah needed at that moment. But the question was, what form should that Ummah take? Or that leadership take? Right? We have to, who could administer rules in the absence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Who could mediate conflicts in the absence of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Who was more entitled to take on the mantle of leadership? This was a debate amongst the Sahaba. The Madinans felt that it was their right. The Meccans felt it was their right. Right? So there was a debate, a healthy debate that was happening. And guess what? During all of this time, the family of the Prophet ﷺ is worried about just burying him, just taking care of his ritual aspects. So this is this is what essentially transpired. And within hours of the Prophet ﷺ dying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Ansar called a meeting to elect a new leader, as if they were now separate from the Muhajirin. So they had their own meeting. And it did look like things are going to go back to the tribal ways in which they had lived before. That for a moment. The proposal was a two-state solution, believe it or not. A Medinan state and a Meccan state. That was actually one of the proposals that they put out. The Prophet's closest companion was whom? Say again? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, yes. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he argued that, look, we're one ummah, we should remain together. We should not split into a Meccan ummah and a Medinan ummah. Instead, he went in and said, we should have a single leader as we did under the Prophet ﷺ. I nominate Umar ibn Khattab. That's what Abu Bakr did. Umar refused. He refused and he said, look, not only am I not going to do this, I pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. I pledge allegiance to him, and he even reminded him that this is the man that the Prophet ﷺ chose to lead prayer in the final days, in his final days. Right? So almost saying that you have somebody here who could be a political leader as well as a religious leader. And it seemed like, look, most of the people, they knew Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, they knew he was compassionate, they knew he was sensible, he was courageous, he was a man of hilm. He didn't just make willy-nilly decisions, so to speak. And so for many of the people who were gathered at that gathering, they said, you know what? This is a sensible choice. We can go forward with this. And so it was amongst this group of people that comprised of both Madanis and Meccans that came together that then said, we will adopt Abu Bakr as-Siddiq as our leader. And even though the term Khalifa had never been used before, that was what was understood. He is the Khalifatul Rasul. He is the successor of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We'll get it after, inshallah. However, just one notable thing before I go into what I find to be one of the most incredible speeches, inauguration speeches ever, actually. What is, not everybody was present at that particular meeting. This is, by the way, talked about in our history. A leading candidate for leadership was the Prophet's own cousin, Ali ibn Abi Talib. But what was Ali doing? Where was Ali? I mentioned that Abu Bakr was there, Omar was there, we had some of the Ansari that were there. Where was Abu Bakr? Or where was Ali? He was? Yes, exactly. He was taking care of the body of the Prophet ﷺ. He's part of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So he is actually busy getting the family together to do the ghusl, to do the washing of the body, and all of this is being discussed, right, away from the family. Excuse me. By the time he heard anything about this decision that had been made, by the time he heard anything about it, it was already, the decision had already been made that Abu Bakr is now going to be our leader. Excuse me. Excuse me. Ali, this caused some strife amongst some of the people who were in proponent of Ali ibn Abi Talib becoming the next like successor. Again, by if you look at just bloodline and lineage, like, hey, maybe this is the way to do it. And that was the way kings used to work in the past, right? But he was, in essence, he was not consulted about the matter. Right? And there's a hadith in Bukhari in which he mentions this later on. He's like, I didn't have any issues with the decision being made, just that we weren't consulted in the making of that decision. Right? We felt that we had some right. We should have had some right to it. Some say that Ali gave allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq immediately. Jazakallahu khairan. Others say that it may have taken 6 months or more. Right? So there's some difference of opinion on that. Now, I want to be very clear. There was no mutiny against against Abu Bakr as-Siddiq from these companions. There was not like an uprising, like, oh, how dare Abu Bakr as-Siddiq do this, right? To our knowledge, that did not happen. There wasn't at least any recordings of that. There were some differences, and they were discussed. But when when the Pledge of Allegiance was given to Abu Bakr, by and large, the Sahaba followed suit with that. Do you have a question? Yeah. There are a lot of historians, especially recently, that have talked a lot about justification one way or the other, right? Whether it should have been Ali, whether it was Abu Bakr, like who was the rightful heir, so to speak, of the Khilafah. There's been a lot of discussions around those things. I will leave it to this to say, regardless of what should have happened, we know what did happen, right? And what did happen did not cause a civil war amongst those individuals that were there, Ali included in that, right? There was no mutiny or uprising against it. So regardless of whether there was some sense of like, I thought I was going to be it, or this person was going to be it, or that person was going to be it, this was a completely political decision that had to be made in terms of who do we think can keep people together. Now, I think, Allahu Alam, if you look at it historically, what Abu Bakr as-Siddiq did during his Khilafah is testament to the fact that he was able to keep these tribes unified. That was the end goal. How do we keep the people of Mecca and Arabia unified? And he didn't have a very easy time with that, right? I want to just mention something. This is a great book. In fact, I'm not going to ask you to buy too many books, but this is one I am going to ask you to buy. So this is called A Caliph for Our Times. And the author of this is Dr. Iqbal Yunus, who is a community member here. And one of our founders, actually, of the Adam Center, right? And I'm really going to recommend everybody buy this book and read this book. This is a sharh, or like an analysis of the inaugural speech of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. What did he say when he became Khalifa? So it's a beautiful speech. You'll see the translation written up here, right on the slide. Let me see if I can find the Arabic in this book. I don't know if he has it all together in one place, but it's beautiful. The very first line that he starts with is قَدْ وُلِّيتُ عَلَيْكُمْ وَلَسْتُ بِخَيْرِكُمْ. Yeah. أيها الناس قَدْ وُلِّيتُ عَلَيْكُمْ وَلَسْتُ بِخَيْرِكُمْ فإن أحسنت فأعينوني وإن أسأت الصدق أمانة والكذب خيانة. It's a beautiful statement. He says here that, O people, I have been put in charge over you. قَدْ وُلِّيتُ عَلَيْكُمْ وَلَسْتُ بِخَيْرِكُمْ. He's saying, I have been placed in command over you, but I am not the best of you. وَلَسْتُ بِخَيْرِكُمْ. This is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, by the way, who, by and large, Sunni Muslims believe he was the best of us, right? But his inaugural speech, he's saying, you have asked me, and I have been put in charge over you, but I am not the best of you. If I do the right thing, فَعِنُونِي, then help me. And if I do the wrong thing, then correct me. الصِّدْقُ أَمَانَةٌ وَالْكَذْبُ خِيَانَةٌ. Truthfulness is a trust, and lying is treachery or betrayal. The weak among you is strong in my sight. I will surely try to remove their pain and suffering. And the strong among you is weak to me. I will, if Allah wills, fulfill the rights in full. When obscene things spread among any nation, calamities continue to descend upon them. As long as I obey Allah and His Messenger, you should obey me. If I do not obey Allah and His Messenger, then obedience to me is not an obligation upon you. Now stand for prayer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon you. Beautiful speech that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq gave. And Dr. Iqbal Yunus has done a kind of a full analysis of that speech from a leadership perspective. So really recommend everyone getting this book. Again, you can see his humility, what he was known for. He's saying, I'm not the best of you, but you've asked me to be in charge, and so I'm in charge over you. And by the way, this is one of the attributes of really good leadership. You know, really good leaders are not the ones that are just, they're going to make every call themselves. They're going to inspire the people under them to do the right things. And that's what he's saying. He's like, you all are better than me in many ways. So take advantage of that. Don't just keep coming down on me, if you will. Right? And so he mentions here, قَدْ وُلِّيتُ عَلَيْكُمْ وَلَسْتُ بِخَيْرِكُمْ. He's like, I've been put in charge of you, but I'm not the best of you. Then he reminds people, الصِّدْقُ أَمَانَةٌ. Truthfulness is a trust, وَالْكَذِبُ خِيَانَةٌ. And lying is treachery. Don't be dishonest. Don't be dishonest. And then I love what he says here. The strong among you are weak to me, and the weak among you are strong. In other words, I'm going to be an advocate for the people who don't have a voice. I'm going to be an advocate for the people who are weaker in society. And if you think you're strong, to me you're weak. Because I'm going to make sure that your strength doesn't allow you to impose your will on others without right. This was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. By the way, I was just talking to my son on the way here, right? I mean, we could do classes and classes upon the character of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, right? But in the context of this course, we're talking about the history. So let's move real briefly in the last few minutes that we have here to the legacy of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq when it came to his caliphate itself, okay? The reign of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was very short, 2.5 years. That's it. But it was incredibly important. I mentioned earlier, the Muslims were still mourning the loss of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was during this time that many of the tribes around Arabia decided, look, we made a pledge of allegiance to the Prophet who doesn't even live anymore. So we can go back on our pledge. We don't need to continue to fulfill this pledge. He, radiallahu anh, had to deal with the fact that there were factions of Muslims that were now starting to apostate, what they called the Ridda Wars. And he had to bring them back in line. He had to remind them that, look, you didn't sign up to do this just with the Prophet. You signed up as a contract with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And how dare you go back on his, kind of on this, in this area. So these wars where he went and he actually fought with these tribes to try and bring them back into Islam and bring them back. And by the way, some of the things that they fought about was, why am I going to pay zakat? Right? Like they're like, I shouldn't have to pay zakat to anybody. It's my money, it's our tribe's money, we're going to keep it. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, I see no difference between zakat and salah. So if you're going to pray, you're going to pay zakat. If you're Muslim, you're going to pay zakat. And he went and coerced these tribes in and around Arabia to make sure that they paid their zakat. Now, what's really interesting, I mean, Karen Armstrong, she's not Muslim, so she makes an interesting point about this. She says that if it weren't for Abu Bakr, zakah may not be a pillar of Islam. Obviously, we know that that's not true, right? But like her point is that he went to war to fight to establish zakah, and that she thinks it could have been that if he had not done that, that zakah would have just kind of fallen by the wayside, not really become such an integral part of this deen. Of course, you and I know as Muslims that this is one of the pillars upon which Islam is established. So, but it's interesting that she even takes note of what critical role Abu Bakr as-Siddiq played in making sure people were following zakah, they were paying the zakah. The other issue he had to deal with was false prophets. There were people who declared prophethood after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, saying that, oh, that he just got all this status by being prophet, I'm going to be declared prophet too. One of them actually declared it in his own life, in the Prophet's life. And anybody know who that was? Musaylama. Anybody know what tribe he was from? What's the word you use after Musaylama? Al-Kadhab. Anybody know what that means? The liar. Like he's literally known as Musaylama the liar. Think about that. Every other Arab, Jahili or not, you know who their father was. But in Musaylama's case, who was his father? We don't know, because he's known in Islamic history and in world history now as Musaylama the liar. Yeah, look at that. There you go. You know, it's interesting because actually, for those that don't know the story, it's in the Sirah, but he actually sent a letter to the Prophet ﷺ where he said, this is from one messenger, from Musaylama, messenger of God, to Muhammad, messenger of God. And the Prophet ﷺ responded back, this is a letter from Muhammad Rasulullah to Musaylama al-Kadhab, the liar. Right? And that's the name that stuck, even in Islamic history to this or even in history to this very time. I always found that fascinating. You know, in an era and a time period where we know everybody's father, because that's how they're identified. Al-Walid ibn Mughira, Khalid ibn Walid. Like, you know all of that, all the lineage. For Musaylama, we just know him as being the liar. Of course, what did he lie about? Being prophet. We know that he was not. And he was actually killed in a battle after that. So, and he was from Banu Hanifa. That was the name of the tribe that was in like where we would call it kind of where Riyadh is today, like in that area. But he took these threats very, very seriously. And he declared that secession, if you left the Islam, it would be considered treason. Basically, if you left them, if you've given a commitment to being part of Islam and now you're leaving, we're going to consider that treason. And so this was really establishing, the reason I bring this up, brothers and sisters, is because this was starting to establish Islam as a social movement, not just as a belief system, right? Abu Bakr made sure of that. Again, it's only 2 years, and he had to deal with a whole bunch of uprisings. But he made sure that the social order was together, that this ummah was going to remain committed as an ummah and was not going to, fragment out. So Tawheed was supposed to be absolute theologically and in the community sense. In other words, there's a oneness of God, there's also a oneness of community. And we have to do our utmost to maintain that oneness of community. In general, the Abu Bakr as-Siddiq appointed none other than Khalid ibn Walid as the general to collect the zakah and crush the rebellions that were happening. So this is where he spent a lot of his time. Musaylama himself was killed in the Battle of Yamama by none other than Wahshi ibn Harb. Anybody know who Wahshi was? He was the one that killed Hamza. He used the exact same spear that he used to kill Hamza to kill Musaylama al-Kadhab. He became Muslim obviously later on, right? This is why he did that. But he fought on behalf of that. This lasted, these Ridda wars, these wars of tribes trying to apostate, lasted about a little over a year and a half. And many historians see this period of time as this is what established Islam as a polity. Not just in Medina. In Medina, it was just kind of confined to one area, but as kind of a regional power, it was during the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq that this became a regional power. Now, what Omar does, which we'll discuss inshallah ta'ala next time, is he expands on that power. And he has a much longer time horizon too, because he's Khalifa for 10 years, not for just 2. So here though, from now on, this point forward, Islamic history would be totally disassociated from kind of the nomadic Bedouin tribes that the Arabs were used to. Each one had their own tribal history. From this point forward, it's Islamic history. And it's for one ummah, and it's as a unified community. This is part of the legacy of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, right? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And by the way, he oftentimes had to, he had to fight even his own companions, right, with their opinions that he had, right, on things. Like for instance, Omar did not necessarily want to go to war with these other tribes. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was like, no, we will make sure that we stay united, and I will bring these other tribes in line. Also have to consider, brothers and sisters, I know this is sometimes hard for us to, they're coming from a culture in pre-modern society where they can still be coerced into doing things, right? Like in other words, there's a sense of which if you have an army and you don't use it at all, you're going to be ransacked by the next ruler that's going to come in. We talked about this a little bit last time. Very important for us to recognize that the worst thing you can do with power is just squander it. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq knew this, and he said, look, we are going to use our power to keep our tribes unified as an ummah. We're not going to subjugate anybody to, meaningless or treasonous things or do anything, but we will keep people in line to make sure that that does not go out of sync, that we keep together as one ummah. And history, Allahu Alam, has proven him right in his decisions, because to this day, he was able to, but it wasn't, and to be clear, it wasn't just him, and I'll leave you guys with this last story, because I know there's another class that will be starting soon. Suhail ibn Amr. Suhail ibn Amr was a Muslim who converted to Islam very late, like in the last, after, actually many of the people say after the Fath of Mecca, he became Muslim. And so he was only in Islam a couple of years before the Prophet ﷺ died. And they say that when Suhail ibn Amr heard about these tribes that were apostating, that were leaving Islam, he stood at the Kaaba. He stood at the Kaaba and he called upon all of the Arab tribes in that area around the people, like basically to the people of Mecca. And he said, how dare you go back on a pledge that you have made before Allah? He's like, you would never have done this in Jahiliyyah. How dare you do this now with Allah as your witness? You testified to the oneness of God and to Muhammad being his messenger. You are now honor bound to maintain that unity. And they said, because of Suhail ibn Amr's speech, not one tribe in Mecca apostated. Not one of them left Islam. Keep in mind, guys, he was only Muslim for a couple of years. But this is the kind of ownership he felt about Islam. And that's why I think it's very important for us to feel this sense of ownership when it comes to our religion. This is not about, I have to get a certain amount of knowledge and I have to go and get some degrees. It's about being empowered and confident as a Muslim. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people who are empowered. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of us, give us the best in this world and the next, and protect us from the punishment of the fire. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I'm going to turn off the microphone now, because I think there is another class that is going on. But I'm happy to stay for a few minutes and take some questions and answers about any of the content that we covered today. Inshallah ta'ala, next week, as you'll see, we will talk about the reign of Umar ibn Khattab, then we'll get into Uthman and then into Ali. Yes, it'll be here, inshallah. Next week. Yes, I can do that. Now that we have a WhatsApp group, I'll share it into the WhatsApp group, inshallah.